नमस्कार, मैं आनंद कुमार खत्री। आज के हमारे लेक्चर का विषय है बायोस्फीयर पार्ट फर्स्ट। बायोस्फीयर relatively thin life supporting stratum of Earth's surface, extending from a few kilometers into the atmosphere to the deep sea vents of the ocean. The biosphere is a global ecosystem composed of living organisms, biota, and the abiotic non-living factors from which they are derive energy and nutrients. This is the diagrammatic presentation. Earth environmental sphere. Before the coming of the life, Earth was a bleak place, a rocky globe with shallow seas and a thin band of gases, largely carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, molecular nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and water vapor. It is a hostile and barren planet. This strictly inorganic state of the Earth is called the Geosphere. It consists of the lithosphere, the rock and soil, the hydrosphere, the water, and the atmosphere, the air. Energy from the sun relentlessly bombard the surface of the primitive earth, and in time, millions of years, chemicals and physical actions produce the first evidence of life. Formless, jelly like blobs that could collect energy from the environment and produce more of their own kind. This generation of life in the thin outer layer of the geosphere established what is called the biosphere, the zone of life, an energy diverting skin that uses the matter of the earth to make living substance. The biosphere is a system characterized by the continuous cycling of matter and an accompanying flow of solar energy in which certain large molecules and cells are self reproducing. Water is a major predisposing factor for all life depends on it. The elements carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, and when combined as protein, lipid, carbohydrate, and nucleic acids, provide the building blocks. The fuel and the direction for the creation of life. Energy flow is required to maintain the structure of organism by the formation and splitting of phosphate bonds. Organisms are cellular in nature and always contain some sort of enclosing membrane structure, and all have nucleic acids that store and transmit genetic information. All light on earth depends ultimately upon green plant as well as upon water. Plants utilize sunlight in a process called photosynthesis to produce the food upon which animals feed and to produce as a byproduct oxygen, which most animals require for respiration. At first, the ocean and the land were teeming with large number of a few kinds of simple single cell organism, but slowly plants and animals of increasing complexity evolved. Interrelationships developed so that certain plants grew in association with certain other plants, and in animals associated with the plants and with one another to form community of organisms, including those of forest, grasslands, deserts, dunes, bogs, rivers, and lakes. Living communities and their non-living environment are inseparably interrelated and constantly interact upon each other. For convenience, any segments of the landscape that includes the biota and abiotic component is called an ecosystem. A lake is an ecosystem when it is considered in totality as not just water but also nutrients, climate, and all the life contained within it. A given forest, meadow, or river is likewise an ecosystem. One ecosystem grade into another along zone termed ecotone, where a mixture of plant and animal species form from the two ecosystems occurs. A forest considered as an ecosystem is not simply a stand of trees, but is a complex of soil, air, water, of climates, minerals, bacteria, viruses, fungi, grasses, herbs, trees, insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals. Stated another way, the abiotic or non-living portion of each ecosystem is in the biosphere includes the flow of energy, nutrients, water, and gases, and the concentrations of organic, inorganic substances in the environment. The biotic or living portion includes three general categories of organisms based on their methods of acquiring energy. The primary producer, largely green plants. The consumer, which includes all the animals, and the decomposers, which includes the microorganisms that break down the remains of plants and animals into simpler components for recycling in the biosphere. Aquatic ecosystems are those involving marine environment as and freshwater environment on the land. Terrestrial ecosystems are those based on major vegetational types such as forest, grasslands, deserts, tundra. Particular kind of animals are associated with each such plant province. Ecosystem may be further subdivided into smaller biotic unit called communities. Examples of communities includes the organisms in a stand of a pine tree, on a coral reef, and in a cave, a valley, a lake, or a stream. The major consideration in the community is the living component, the organism. The abiotic factors of the environment are excluded. A community is a collection of species population. In a strand of pines, there may be many species of insects, of birds, of mammals, each of a separate breeding unit, but each dependent on the others for its continued existence. A species, furthermore, is composed of individual single functioning unit identifiable as organism. Beyond this level, the units of the biosphere are those of the organism's organ system composed of organs of tissues, tissues of cells, cells of molecules, and molecules of atomic elements and energy. The progression, therefore, proceeding upward from atom and energy is towards fewer units, larger and more complex in pattern at each successive level. This article focuses on the makeup of the biosphere and examine the relationship between its principal component, including man. The characteristics and dynamic of biological population and communities are dealt with, as are the interaction that constitute the primary stabilizing links among the constituent organism. Due attention is also given to the distribution pattern of these biotic units and to the processes that produced such pattern. The major aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems of the earth are treated in some detail. Other points include energy transformation and transfer within the biosphere and the cyclic flow of the material needed for life. For the development, methodology, and applications of the study of interaction of organisms with their environment and each other. Further treatment of the various aquatic and terrestrial environment is provided in ocean, lake, river, continental landform, Arctic, and Antarctica. The characteristics and classifications of living organisms are covered in detail in algae, amphibian, angiosperms, animal, annelids, arachnids, arthropods, escalminthes, bacteria, birds, bryophytes, chordates, cnidarians, crustaceans, dinosaurs, echinoderms, tuphons, fish, flatworm, fungus, gymnosperms, insects, lampshell, mammals, mollusks, plants, protists, protozoa, reptiles, sponges, and viruses. The diversity of life. The biosphere supports between 3 and 30 million species of plants, animals, fungi, single-celled prokaryotes and such as bacteria and single-celled eukaryotes such as protozoans. Of this total, only about 1.4 million species have been named so far, and fewer than 1% have been studied for their ecological relationship and their role in ecosystem. A little more than half the named species are insects, which dominate terrestrial and freshwater communities worldwide. The laboratories of systematics are filled with insect species yet to be named and described. Hence, the relationships of NGS organisms to the environment and the role that species play in the biosphere are not beginning to be understood. This is the estimated number of known living species, in which you are showing the insects and other algae and other protozoans, etc., plants. The organization of the biosphere, natural grouping. This tremendous diversity of life is organized into natural ecological grouping. As life has evolved, populations of organisms have become separated into different species that are reproductively isolated from one another. These species are organized through their interrelationship into complex biological communities. The interaction in these communities affect and are affected by the physical environment in which they occur, thereby forming ecosystem through which the energy and the nutrients necessary for life flow and cycle. The mix of the species and physical environment vary across the globe, creating ecological communities or biomes such as the boreal forest of North America and Eurasia and the rainforest of the tropics. The sum total of the richness of these biomes is the biosphere. Procession, processes of evolution. This hierarchical organization of life has become about through the major processes of evolution. Natural selection, the differential success of the reproduction of the hereditary variations results in from the interaction of the organism with their environment. Gene flow, the movement of the genes among different populations of a species, and random genetic drift, the genetic change that occur in a small population owing to change. Natural selection operates on the expressed characteristics of genetic variants found within population, knowing members of the populations who are less well studied to their environment from those better suited to it. In this manner, populations become adapted to their local ecosystem, which include both the physical environment and the other species with which they interact in order to survive and reproduce. The genetic variation that is necessary for a species to adopt the physical environment and to other organisms arises from new mutations within population, the recombination of genes during sexual reproduction, and the migration of and interbreeding with the individuals from other population. In very small population, however, some of that variation is lost by chance alone through random genetic drift. The combined result of these evolutionary processes is that after many generations, population of the some species have widely divergent characteristics. Some of these populations eventually become so genetically different that their members cannot successfully interbreed, resulting in the evolution of a separate species speciation. The diversification of life through local adaptation of populations and species has created the tremendous biodiversity found on the earth. In most regions, a square kilometer, 0.4 square mile, will harbor hundreds, in some places even thousands of species. The interaction between these species create intricate webs of interrelationships as the organisms reciprocally evolve, adapting to one another and becoming specialized for their interaction. Coevolution, community ecology, the coevolutionary processes. Natural communities of species reflects the sum of these species interactions and the ongoing complex selection processes pressures they constantly endure that drive their evolution. The many ecological and evolutionary processes that affect the interrelationships among species and their environment render ecology one of the most intricate of the sciences. The answer to the major question in ecology requires an understanding of the relative effect of many variables acting simultaneously. The importance of the biosphere. The continued functioning of the biosphere is dependent not only on the maintenance of the intimate interactions among the myriad species within the local communities but also on the looser yet crucial interaction of all species and communities around the globe. The earth is blanketed with so many species and so many different kinds of biological communities because populations have been able to adapt to almost any kind of environment on earth through natural selection. Life forms have evolved that are able to survive in the ocean depths, the frigid conditions of Antarctica, and the near boiling temperature of geysers. The great richness of adaptations found among different populations and species of living organisms in the Earth's greatest resources. It is a richness that has evolved over millions of years and is replaceable. It is therefore starting to realize that our inventory of the Earth's diversity is still so incomplete that the local number of living species cannot be estimated more closely than between 3 and 30 million species. Decades of continuous researches must be carried out by the systematics, ecologists, and geneticists before the inventory of biodiversity provides a more accurate count. The research has been slow. Only recently, as the extinction rate of species has been increasing rapidly, have societies begun to realize the interdependence of species to sustain the life on earth more than the few animal and plant species used by human must be preserved. The flow of energy and the cycling of the nutrients through ecosystem, the regulation of population and the stability of biological community, all of which support the continued maintenance of life, rely on the diversity of species, their adaptation to local physical conditions, and their co-evolved relationship. Despite the limited scientific knowledge of most species, ecological studies during the 20th century made great headway in unraveling the mechanism by which organisms co-evolve with one another and adapt to their physical environment, thereby shaping the biosphere. Each new decade has produced a steady stream of studies showing that the biological and physical elements of the earth are more interconnected than had been previously thought. Those studies also have shown that often the most seemingly insignificant species are crucial to the stability of the communities and ecosystems. Many seemingly obscure species are at risk worldwide of being dismissed as unimportant. The effect that the loss of a species will have an ecosystem is appreciated only by understanding the relationship between organisms and their environments and by studying the ecological and evolutionary process operating within ecosystem. The need to understand how the biosphere functions and has been never been greater. When human populations level were low and technologically abilities crude, societies' impact on the biosphere was relatively small. The increase in human population level and the harvesting of more of the earth's natural resources has altered this situation, especially in recent decades. Human activities are causing major alteration of the patterns of energy flow and nutrient cycling through ecosystem, and these activities are eliminating populations and species that have not been even been described but which might have been of central importance to the maintenance of the ecosystem. The biologist Edward O. Wilson, who coined the term biodiversity, estimated conservatively that in the late 20th century at least 27,000 species were becoming extinct each year. The majority of these were small tropical organisms. The impact that this facet of extinctions would have on the biosphere is akin to receiving a box of engine part and discarding a portion of that before reading the direction, assuming that their absence will have to no negative repercussion on the running of the engine. The following sections describe how many of the biological and physical parts fit together to make the engine to the biosphere run, and with many seemingly obscure species are important to the long-term functioning of the biosphere. Thanks.